You mentioned something which I think Theuns was very keen when we were discussing in the meeting room, integrity of the procurement process. Theuns, if you want to.
Thanks. My name is Theuns Ehlers. I head up the project finance team at ABSA. It's quite impressive to have a lawyer sitting next to me talking about financial models. So, Kieran, that's that's great. It's normally something that the banks and the financial advisors and the sponsors worry about. But just going back to that point about, I'm just going to raise 3 points and then maybe we can deal with some other issues. The first issue on this procurement process, maybe not so much the case in South Africa, but if you go outside of South Africa, sponsors can and developers can secure deals in many different ways. But one of the first things from a lender's perspective and from a bank perspective we typically ask is how they actually secured the contract. Was there a proper competitive tendering process, or was it a bilaterally just one-on-one agreement? And typically, and lots of governments can procure in many different ways, and that's perfectly fine. But in the second scenario, where there wasn't a proper competitive process, we will also then go and actually have a look at how affordable and reasonable the tariffs are that's actually been negotiated. The chairman mentioned that you actually need a good deal for all parties, including, Charles mentioned. And that's so true. I mean, if you sit with a tariff potentially that's unaffordable, it may generate the best equity returns that you've ever seen. But actually you're exposing yourself to a lot of risk down the line of government potentially trying to pull out of that contract. So procurement-wise, that is quite important for us. And I think that's one of the reasons why the South African program has been so successful through the various rounds, because it was creating proper competitive tension from a tariff perspective, and obviously from a bank's perspective, we all sort of competing for the same pot. The second issue, and again, this is not really in South Africa, outside of SA, which is really becoming quite a difficult issue for us to deal with. It's this whole issue about currency risk. Now, you can imagine if you sign a power purchase agreement, or even if you do a normal concession contract in Africa in dollars, and you sit in a country like Zambia where almost overnight, the currency depreciates by 30-40%, you're in a very difficult space. And increasingly now, and it's always been the case, we need to find solutions for these things. Now, in some cases, and I think this is probably one of the reasons contributing to so many deals just getting delayed endlessly. But you've got to find other ways to try to mitigate this currency risk. Now, there's no, I can't sell you a secret solution that's just going to solve all of these things. But contractually, from a lenders and from a sponsor perspective, you've got to make sure that you're not the one actually finally exposed to the risk. So you're obviously going to try to mitigate the risk by putting as much as possible on the host government to underpin certain payments. And in some cases, if you speak to lenders about, and this is coming on to my third point, one of the biggest challenges that we have in Africa is the credit quality of some of these utilities. Even our own electricity utility, Eskom, is also facing enormous financial stress. So as a start, you would like the host government to back up their commitments through guarantees, through letters of support. I'm sure the lawyers will have many different sort of structures to achieve that level of support. But in some cases, even that host government support may not be sufficient, in which case you need to look further to get the credit wrapped by an external party. And that's when you start looking at the likes of the World Bank. MIGA's got products, and even there's some private insurance products. So just to conclude my part, and again I fully agree with my with the speakers before me. Try to involve not only the lawyers and not only the advisors. Try to involve your banks as early as possible in the process, so that we can help you navigate through some of these key bankability issues and sit alongside you trying to find solutions to get these things done. Because the last thing we want as a bank is for someone to show us, but we've got our PPA, it's fully negotiated. We've got our EPC contract. There's our direct agreement as well. Now just give us the money. 9 out of 10 cases, that's just not going to work. So we'd rather sit alongside you from the start and make sure that we negotiate these documents, we actually sign something that's bankable. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think that's something which I felt has not been discussed to date. What we're saying in different words is the whole supply chain on most of the power sectors is not sustainable. What we're saying is there is an economic player which is making massive amount of losses, usually the national utility, and that's required, in fact, heavy structuring and a lot of parties involved to try to fix it.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.